Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you. Maybe you're listening from a small room lit by a single lamp, or perhaps from a quiet bed where the curtains are drawn and the night air slips softly through the window.
These bandages are filthy.
Some of you may be listening from faraway cities where the hum of traffic still lingers. Others may be tucked into cottages or dorm rooms, wrapped in silence, hearing only the faint tick of a clock on the wall. What time is it for you, I wonder? Is it midnight where the world outside feels hushed and heavy? Or perhaps early morning, the kind of hour where sleep still clings to your body and the sky hasn't yet found its light? Wherever you are, whatever hour has found you, this story is here to keep you company, to guide you gently into rest. So let's take a moment. Dim your lights, let your screens soften, and if you can, settle beneath your blanket. Feel the fabric against your skin, the pillow beneath your head, the steady rhythm of your breath as it begins to slow. You don't need to do anything more. Just listen. Just drift. Tonight we'll step into a story both ordinary and extraordinary. A story of lamplight and corridors, of cleaning and care, of how one woman, Florence Nightingale, washed the world into a new kind of order. The title is a little playful. How Florence Nightingale cleaned everything except her own fame. But don't worry, we won't rush. We'll move gently, slowly, as though walking by candlelight through history's quieter rooms. And if this journey helps you feel calm, or if somewhere along the way your eyelids grow heavy and you drift into sleep, you might let me know later with a like or a subscribe, but only if it feels right, only if it flows as softly as a sigh. For now, just breathe, rest, and let the story carry you. Imagine, if you will, a long corridor in the 1850s. The air is thick, not with perfume or spice, but with something harsher, disinfectant and damp stone. Boots echo faintly, water drips in corners, and the faint scratch of brushes hums in the distance. This is not a palace, nor a parlour. It is a military hospital during the Crimean War. Florence Nightingale enters quietly carrying a lamp. Not a chandelier, not a grand torch, just a small steady flame. Its glow paints circles on the walls as she moves, her footsteps soft, her eyes steady. Around her, patients stir, shadows shift, the night breathes. And all the while, Florence is not thinking of statues or songs written in her honour, she's thinking of soap. Yes, soap. Buckets of it sloshing with water, towels drying on lines, sheets boiled until the steam filled entire rooms. You see, before Florence, hospitals were not places of healing so much as waiting rooms for illness. Dirty bedding, unwashed floors, spoiled food. It was chaos wrapped in brick. Florence, practical and tireless, changed that with brushes, with buckets, with her stubborn insistence that clean mattered more than ceremony. Now close your eyes and imagine the scent. Not sweet exactly, but sharp. The tang of carbolic acid, the faint freshness of scrubbed linen. The floors, once grimy, now gleam faintly in the lamplight. The air, once heavy, carries a thin note of cleanliness, almost like fresh rain. Isn't it curious how something so plain as clean can feel like luxury in the right place? She earned the name the Lady with the Lamp, but perhaps she might just as easily have been called the Lady with the Mop. Fame found her because she carried light down dark halls, but her real power was in the quiet war she waged against dirt, germs, and the silent killers of infection. Picture her, sleeves rolled, skirts tucked back, moving through rows of cots. Each man she passes sighs with relief, not because she speaks of glory, but because the sheets beneath him no longer smell of sickness. This is her revolution, not in speeches, not in parades, but in boiling water and open windows. Listen closely. The splash of water poured into basins, the soft rasp of brush against stone, the murmur of nurses following her example. These are not grand sounds, but they are steady, soothing, almost hypnotic. A lullaby of labour, each note promising survival. And so, Florence Nightingale's fame was born not from crowns or medals, but from cleanliness. She washed her way into history, one scrubbed floor at a time, and yet curiously, even as her reputation gleamed, she herself avoided the polish of glory. She left speeches unwritten, honours half accepted, fame left untidy at the edges. And here we linger, In a corridor that smells faintly of soap, the lamplight still glowing, the night stretching long. The chapter closes softly, like the hush after water is poured away, and we drift onward, ready to follow Florence further into her quiet, stubborn, and strangely soothing crusade. The scent of soap still lingers in that long hospital corridor, sharp and steady, like a thread pulling us forward. As the lamplight flickers against stone walls, let us follow Florence Nightingale a little further, not into fame, but into the simple, endless rhythm of cleaning. Picture the Scutari Barracks Hospital in the Crimea, 1854. Imagine a place built for soldiers, not for healing. The floors are filthy, the drains clogged, the bedding foul with weeks of use. Rats scurry in corners, flies buzz lazily over spoiled meat in kitchens. It is not a hospital, not yet. It is a breeding ground for disease. Typhus, cholera, dysentery, illnesses that kill more soldiers than bullets do. And here comes Florence. Not a general with a sword, but a woman with a notebook, a lamp, and a determination that borders on stubbornness. She inspects every ward, every drain, every storeroom. She takes notes in neat handwriting, then sets about the work that many considered too plain to notice. She orders fresh linen. She demands clean water. She insists the kitchens scrub their pans, the windows open for air, the drains cleared so waste can flow away. Now close your eyes and imagine the transformation. At first, the place stinks of filth, a heavy air that clings to skin and clothes. But slowly, with each bucket of boiling water, with each bar of soap rubbed raw, the smell shifts. The stench lessens, the air grows lighter, a faint freshness creeps in. The walls still stand grey, the floors still rough stone, but now they feel alive with possibility. Isn't it curious how cleaning, so ordinary in daily life, becomes extraordinary here? To sweep, to scrub, to boil sheets. These are not chores in this place. They are salvation. Each scrubbed floor is a life saved. Each open window a soldier's fever eased. Florence was not alone. She trained her nurses, many of them untested and unsure, into steady workers. Some had never lifted a mop, never tended the sick. Under her direction, they learned to fold sheets neatly, to scrub wounds gently, to clean rooms until they smelled faintly of soap instead of sickness. She was not just the lady with the lamp. She was the general of cleanliness, commanding armies of mops and brushes. Listen closely. The shuffle of nurses' skirts as they move through the halls, the soft swish of cloth scrubbing tables, the hiss of water poured from kettles. These are the sounds of battle here. Not muskets or cannons, but the patient fight against dirt and disease. And yet Florence did not call attention to herself. She worked late into the night, moving silently from bed to bed, checking wounds, straightening sheets. Fame found her, whispered her name, painted her in portraits. But in her mind there was always another bucket to fill, another sheet to wash, another ward to cleanse. So we linger here, in the hospital that shifts slowly from chaos to calm. The men sleep more peacefully now, their fevers easing, their wounds healing, their spirits lifted by the simple comfort of clean sheets beneath them. The lamplight glows faintly as Florence walks on, her shadow stretching along the walls, and with that quiet image, the chapter closes, like a door eased shut, like a night settling into silence. We drift onward, following her footsteps into the next part of her story. The halls of Scutari grow quieter now, their air no longer choked with foulness but softened by the rhythm of soap and water. Florence Nightingale walks them steadily, her lamp swaying gently in her hand. And tonight, as we follow her further, we discover another part of her quiet battle, the fight for fresh air and open space. Hospitals in the mid-19th century were not designed for healing. Windows were shut tight against drafts, wards were crowded, and the air grew thick with breath, sickness and despair. Men lay pressed side by side, fever spreading faster than medicine could act. To many this was normal, to Florence it was intolerable. Imagine her voice, calm, precise, but firm, as she ordered the windows to be opened. Fresh air swept in, cool and bracing, stirring curtains that had long hung heavy with dust. The first breaths may have been sharp, cold even, but with them came relief. The ward smelled less of sickness, less of death, more of life itself. Close your eyes and picture the moment. A soldier weak with fever feels the brush of a breeze on his cheek. It is not medicine, not food, but it carries comfort. Another hears the flapping of fabric as curtains move, and for the first time in weeks the air feels light. Isn't it curious how something invisible, air, can change the spirit so deeply? Florence believed that ventilation was as important as medicine. She wrote later that without clean air, even the strongest body could falter, and so, day after day, she insisted that windows remain open, that foul drains be cleared, that air must circulate like a living force through the hospital. Listen closely. The squeak of window latches as they are pulled open, the rush of wind sweeping in, the faint flutter of paper on a desk as air moves through. These sounds, ordinary in any home, became revolutionary here. The soldiers began to call her an angel, not because she spoke of glory, but because she made them breathe easier, sleep deeper, feel human again. She carried her lamp, yes, but perhaps the true light she brought was the unseen glow of fresh air filling lungs once starved of it. And yet, as always, Florence herself did not polish this image. Fame crept after her, eager to paint her as a saint. She kept walking, sleeves rolled, skirts dusted, her mind on windows, drains, and order. She cleaned the air, but she left her own legend to drift, untended, like a draught through an open hall. So let us linger here, in a ward where curtains sway and men rest easier. The air is cooler, fresher, quieter. The lamplight flickers once more, and Florence passes through, her shadow long against the wall. The chapter closes softly, like a breeze slipping through a window, and we drift onward, ready for the next gentle tale in her quiet crusade. The corridors of Scutari now breathe more freely, their windows open, their air lightened. The scent of soap and the coolness of night air linger together, soft as a whispered hymn. But Florence Nightingale's battle was not only with floors and windows. Tonight, we step with her into another corner of order, the kitchens. Picture the hospital kitchens in the winter of 1854. Large, dim rooms, their stoves flickering weakly, their pans blackened with grease. The food, when it came, was often spoiled, damp bread or meat already sour. Hungry soldiers were given meals that made them weaker, not stronger. In this place, food, meant to heal, was yet another danger. Florence noticed. She always noticed. With her lamp in one hand and her notebook in the other, she stepped into these kitchens and saw what others had long ignored. She wrote down inventories, checked supplies, and then demanded something very simple: cleanliness. Now close your eyes and imagine the transformation. Pots scrubbed until they shone faintly in firelight. Pans scraped free of soot. Floors washed, tables scoured, knives polished. The smell shifted too. Where once there was the sour tang of spoiled meat, now came the gentle comfort of broth simmering slowly, the sweetness of onions softening in butter, the rich, steady warmth of bread baking fresh. Isn't it curious how food, so ordinary, can turn into medicine when given with care? A bowl of clean broth, a slice of fresh bread, these were no less healing than any tonic. Soldiers who had groaned at the sight of their meals now ate slowly, gratefully, their strength returning spoonful by spoonful. Listen closely. The scrape of ladles stirring soup, the thump of knives on wooden boards, the faint hiss of bread crusts cracking as they cooled. These sounds were not grand, not dramatic, but they were steady and soothing, filling the halls with the quiet rhythm of nourishment. Florence, of course, did not stop there. She organized supplies, tracked diets, calculated how much food was needed each day. She believed that order in the kitchen meant order in recovery, and she was right. Mortality rates began to drop. Cleanliness was saving lives, one scrubbed pan and boiled potato at a time, and yet she left her own fame untended. Others wrote about her lamp, her angelic figure, her saintly image. She herself kept busy over steaming pots and endless lists. She cleaned the kitchens, but she never cleaned the portrait that fame painted of her. So we linger here a moment, the warmth of soup rising in the air, bread resting golden on a board, soldiers sighing with quiet relief as they eat. The fire hums in the stove. The night presses gently at the windows and Florence passes by, her lamp steady, her eyes sharp. The chapter closes softly, like the lid of a soup pot settling into place, and we drift onward, ready to follow her footsteps into the next gentle corner of her work. The kitchens now hum with warmth, their pots polished, their soups simmering. The air carries the soft fragrance of broth and fresh bread. But Florence Nightingale's eyes did not rest long in one place. She walked further, her lamp steady, her notebook close at hand. Tonight we follow her into the laundry rooms, those steaming, echoing chambers where fabric became a battlefield. Hospitals in the mid-1800s were draped in filth. Sheets were seldom changed, uniforms stiff with dirt, bandages reused until they became ribbons of infection. Soldiers lay on bedding that smelled of sickness more than of rest. And so Florence turned her attention to laundry, for she knew that cloth too could heal or harm. Picture the great vats of water brought to boil over roaring fires. Nurses and helpers stir linens with long wooden poles, the steam rising thick and heavy. The smell is sharp: soap, lye, heat, damp cotton. It clings to the skin, seeps into the hair. Yet beneath it all, there is a new scent too. Freshness, faint but unmistakable, like rain washing over stone. Close your eyes and imagine a stack of clean sheets folded neatly. The fabric is crisp, warm from drying, its surface smooth against the hand. A wounded soldier sinks into a bed newly made, the feverish stench gone, the air around him lighter. He sighs deeply, not from pain but from relief. Isn't it remarkable how something as ordinary as linen can feel like medicine? Florence organized laundries with the precision of an army. Schedules were made, supplies tracked, standards set. No more would dirty bandages be reapplied. No more would men lie in soiled bedding. She demanded cleanliness, not as luxury, but as necessity. And slowly the death rates fell further. Listen closely. The splash of cloth plunged into vats, the slosh of water poured across stone floors, the rhythmic beat of fabric wrung out and hung to dry. These are the lullabies of laundry, steady and hypnotic, filling the night with the promise of renewal. And yet, while Florence scrubbed the cloth of others, she left her own image unwashed. Her fame gathered wrinkles and folds, shaped more by others than by herself. The angel of Scutari was polished by poets and painters, not by her own hand. She was too busy with sheets and soap to care how history dressed her. So let us pause here, in the warmth of the laundry room, steam curling upward like clouds, clean linen stacked high. The night is quieter now, softer. Soldiers rest in beds that no longer reek of sickness, their dreams gentler, their bodies calmer. The chapter closes like a sheet being smoothed flat across a bed, slow, steady, satisfying, and we drift onward, ready to follow Florence into yet another corner of her quiet crusade. The laundry rooms still steam in our memory, their clouds carrying the scent of soap and boiled linen. Soldiers rest more peacefully now, wrapped in clean sheets, their bodies softened by comfort rather than weighed down by filth. But Florence Nightingale did not stop at soap and starch. Her lamp carried her further, into another corner of quiet revolution, the wards themselves. Picture a vast hall lined with cots. Before her reforms, the beds were crowded, pressed so close together that illness leapt easily from one man to another. The floor was littered with refuse, the air thick, the windows sealed against draughts. In such spaces, silence was not peace, it was despair. Florence saw not just a room, but a system to be ordered. She demanded spacing between beds, rows made neat and even. She had refuse cleared away, tables scrubbed, walls washed until they gleamed faintly in lamplight. She believed that even the arrangement of a room could heal, that tidiness was not mere appearance, but a medicine of its own. Close your eyes and imagine it. A soldier once lost in the press of chaos now lies in a bed with space around him. The air moves, the sheets are clean, the floor beneath him shows its stone, washed and clear. He breathes easier, he feels seen. Isn't it remarkable how order, as quiet as it is, can feel like kindness? Listen closely. The scrape of cots being shifted, the rustle of sheets pulled tight, the muffled steps of nurses arranging tables. These sounds form a rhythm, not loud but steady, a lullaby of labour that reshapes the very air of the ward. Florence believed that dignity mattered, that soldiers, though wounded and weary, deserved more than a mere survival. They deserved order, respect, calm, and so, in her wards, there was not just cleanliness, but gentleness. Flowers appeared on tables, small comforts placed by bedsides. These touches, humble as they were, carried weight. They told men, "You are not forgotten." And yet, while she straightened cots and aligned beds, she never straightened her own legend. Fame gathered around her untidily, like a story half-folded. She remained focused on her wards, on her nurses, on her patients. Others could polish her name, she was polishing the floors. So let us linger here, in the hush of a ward newly ordered. The air is lighter, the space calmer, the night more restful. Men sleep in neat rows, their breathing steady, their bodies wrapped not just in linen but in the dignity of order. The chapter closes softly, like a blanket drawn up under the chin. And we drift onward, following Florence's lamp into the next quiet task that waits in the stillness of history. The wards now lie in calm order, their beds neat, their air light, their silence no longer heavy with despair, but softened with dignity. Florence Nightingale's lamp continues to glow, leading us onward, not to battlefields or parades, but to another quiet corner of her work, the records she kept, the numbers she counted, the statistics she loved. Yes, statistics. Rows of figures, columns of mortality rates, charts and diagrams that looked, at first glance, as dull as the ticking of a clock. But for Florence they were as sharp as scalpels, as powerful as lanterns. Picture her at a small desk in the dim hours of night. Around her, the hospital sleeps. The only sounds are the soft breaths of men and the faint hiss of lamps. And there she sits, pen scratching steadily against paper, recording who lived, who died, what diseases spread, what conditions improved. Her notebook fills with lines and numbers, each mark a life counted, a truth uncovered. Close your eyes and imagine the rhythm, the scratch of quill on parchment, the soft exhale of breath, the occasional flick of pages turned. It is not dramatic, but it is steady, soothing, like the sound of rain tapping gently on a roof. Florence knew that words alone could be doubted, but numbers, patterns, charts, they spoke with undeniable clarity. She created diagrams shaped like petals, shaded in colours, to show how deaths fell as cleanliness rose. In meetings back in England, these images startled officials, woke them from indifference. How curious that her most powerful weapon was not only soap and water, but ink and paper. Isn't it remarkable how statistics, something so dry, so boring to many, could become a lullaby here? Each figure is not just a number, but a life. Each chart not just ink, but evidence of suffering reduced, of survival increased. Listen closely. The quiet turning of pages, the faint creak of a chair as she shifts, the sigh of a candle burning lower. These are the sounds of her nightly work, invisible to fame but vital to history. And yet, while her charts shone brightly in Parliament, Florence herself stayed in the shadows. Others displayed her diagrams, praised her brilliance, spread her name. She sat at her desk, her fame untended, her lamp burning low, her mind fixed on the next page of numbers. So let us linger here a moment longer, at this small desk in the quiet night. The hospital rests around her, the lamp pools its light, the pen moves steadily. It is a scene of patience, of precision, of care, not just for bodies, but for truth itself. The chapter closes softly, like a ledger shut after a long day's work, and we drift onward, following Florence into the next quiet act of her steady, soothing crusade. The ink on Florence Nightingale's records dries slowly, each number settling into permanence. Her lamp still glows on the desk, its light soft on paper, steady as her hand. But when the quill rests and the pages are stacked neatly aside, her work is not yet finished. Tonight we follow her into another quiet battlefield, training her nurses. In the 1850s, The idea of professional nurses was nearly unheard of. Many who tended the sick were untrained, unsteady, sometimes careless. Hospitals were thought of as last resorts, not places of recovery. Florence, with her steady insistence on order, sought to change that. She saw in every nurse the chance to spread cleanliness, discipline, and care far beyond Scutari's walls. Picture the ward at dawn. The men still sleep, their breaths soft and uneven. Florence gathers a small group of women near the windows where the first light filters through. Her voice is low but firm, her instructions clear. She shows them how to wash hands properly, how to change bandages gently, how to fold sheets so they fit tight and smooth. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. A nurse leans over a cot, her hands steady, her movements slow. Another carries fresh water, her steps measured. The air is filled not with hurried commands, but with calm repetition, practice upon practice, until care itself becomes second nature. Isn't it remarkable how teaching so simple multiplies into something vast? Florence could not be everywhere, but with each nurse she trained, her reach extended. Clean wards, fresh air, proper meals, these lessons spread like ripples through the water, soft but unstoppable. Listen closely. The faint swish of skirts as nurses move, the soft murmur of Florence's voice, the occasional scrape of a chair as someone sits to take notes. These are the sounds of learning, gentle and deliberate, the quiet foundation of a profession. Later, back in England, Florence would open her own nursing school at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. There, the same lessons took root, shaping generations of nurses. The echoes of her voice at Scutari would spread across continents, carried not by fame but by discipline, soap, and steady hands. And yet, once more, her own image she left untouched. While newspapers praised her, while poets raised her into legend, she busied herself with the slow, patient work of instruction. Fame swirled around her like dust in the lamplight, and she simply walked past, focused only on the next lesson. So let us linger here a while longer, in this ward at dawn where nurses learn by lamplight. The men rest easier, the air is calm, and knowledge takes quiet root. Florence's lamp glows softly against the stone walls, her figure steady, her voice firm. The chapter closes gently, like a book shut after a lesson well taught, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next quiet act of her story. The soft murmur of Florence's training fades into the dawn, her nurses moving steadily now with new confidence. The hospital feels calmer, less chaotic, its rhythm steadier. But as the wards breathe easier, Florence herself continues to push further. Tonight, we follow her into another corner of her reform, sanitation beyond the hospital walls. For Florence knew that dirt was not confined to corridors and wards. Disease thrived in the very foundations of Scutari, in the drains clogged with waste, in the water fouled with sewage, in the filth that lingered in courtyards where men once marched. Hospitals could be scrubbed spotless, but if the water itself was poisoned, what hope could survive? Picture her walking the grounds in her plain dress, lamp in hand, skirts brushing against damp stone. She inspects drains, peers into cisterns, questions engineers and orderlies alike. Her notes are sharp, her tone unwavering. She demands that waste be cleared, that pipes be mended, that water run clean and free. Close your eyes and imagine the transformation. Where once the air was thick with foul smells, it slowly grows clearer. Stagnant pools drain away. Water flows more freely. The scent of rot, once overwhelming, is replaced by the faint freshness of stone washed by running water. Isn't it curious how something so invisible, sewage unseen beneath the ground, could shape life and death above it? Florence understood this deeply. Long before the word germ became common, she believed that filth itself carried illness, that bad air and stagnant waste were killers. She pressed engineers and officials with the same determination she used with nurses. Clean drains, clean water, clean air, these were her commandments, as holy to her as any scripture. Listen closely. The rush of water newly freed into drains, the scrape of shovels clearing soil, the faint splash of buckets emptied. These are the sounds of her wider war, not just within the hospital but around it, pushing disease back into the shadows. And yet, even as she waged this battle, she did not polish her own role. Reports were written, reforms credited to her leadership, her name spoken in Parliament. But Florence herself remained focused on pipes, drains, and basins. Fame gathered untidily at her feet, like mud on a shoe, while she looked only at the next repair to be made. So let us linger here, in the quiet after the drains run clear. The air is lighter, the water flows, the grounds feel steadier underfoot. Men within the hospital breathe more easily, their survival no longer threatened by what lies unseen beneath the floor. The chapter closes softly, like the gentle sound of water trickling into the earth, and we drift onward, ready to follow her lamp into the next quiet task waiting in history's hush. The drains now run clear, the air lighter, the wards calmer. Florence Nightingale's lamp still glows softly, steady in the dimness, guiding her not only through halls but through thoughts of what must come next. For Florence was not simply a nurse, she was a reformer, a voice that insisted on change even when the world resisted, and tonight we follow her into the quieter battlefields of reports and letters. Picture her seated once again at her desk. The hospital rests, soldiers sleep, the corridors fall silent. But Florence does not sleep. Instead, she writes. Her hand moves steadily across the page, filling it with accounts of conditions, descriptions of reforms, and demands for action. These were not idle letters. They were weapons, sharpened with observation, strengthened with evidence. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of the pen scratching. Slow, deliberate strokes, the pause as she dips into ink, the faint sigh as she gathers her thoughts. Each page grows heavy with detail, lists of supplies needed, requests for more nurses, careful arguments on why sanitation must be improved, not just here, but everywhere. Isn't it remarkable how such quiet work could shape entire nations? Her reports reached London, stirred Parliament, and forced officials to look at what they had ignored. The words of one woman, written in the stillness of night, carried further than cannon fire. Florence did not write for fame. She wrote because she believed truth mattered, that if the world saw what she saw, the filth, the suffering, the needless deaths, it could no longer turn away. And so she wrote with relentless patience, filling page after page, until her voice could no longer be silenced. Listen closely. The rustle of papers stacked in neat piles, the faint creak of the desk as she leans forward, the steady rhythm of pen against paper. These are the lullabies of her reform, soft sounds that carried louder consequences. And yet, while her words spread, her image was shaped by others. Newspapers called her a saint, poets painted her as an angel. The world lifted her name higher than she ever asked. She cleaned hospitals, drains, kitchens, laundries. But she left her own fame unpolished, content to let others do as they pleased with it. So let us linger here a while longer, in the calm of her writing room. The lamp burns low, the papers stack higher, and Florence continues her quiet battle one sentence at a time. The chapter closes softly, like an envelope sealed and set aside, and we drift onward, following her into the next gentle act of her long, untiring work. The sound of Florence's pen fades into the stillness, her reports stacked neatly, her lamp glowing low. The letters will travel far, carrying her voice into halls of power. But here, in the hospital, another task waits. Quieter but no less important, the tending of spirits. For Florence knew that healing was not only of the body but also of the heart. Picture a ward at night. The lamps burn dim, soldiers shift restlessly in their cots, their wounds aching, their thoughts heavy with fear. In this darkness, Florence moves quietly, her steps soft, her light steady. She pauses by each bed, adjusts a pillow, checks a bandage, whispers a word. She is not merely cleaning floors now, she is soothing souls. Close your eyes and imagine her presence. She does not speak loudly, nor stay long. She lingers just enough for a soldier to feel seen, to feel cared for. To one, she may ask softly of his family. To another, she may simply nod and let the lamp's glow fall gently on his face. Isn't it remarkable how sometimes the smallest gestures, an adjusted blanket, a kind word, carry the greatest comfort? Florence believed that dignity was part of healing. She brought flowers into wards, arranged small comforts on tables, ensured that even in illness men felt like human beings, not forgotten bodies. In a world where war reduced people to numbers, she restored individuality with kindness. Listen closely. The creak of floorboards under her careful steps, the rustle of sheets as she tucks them, the soft murmur of thanks whispered by tired lips. These sounds, faint as they are, became a hymn of comfort in the long nights of Scutari. And yet, while the soldiers called her their angel, Florence herself never sought such titles. She saw only the work, the wounds to be dressed, the rooms to be cleaned, the lives to be eased. Fame swirled around her like the smoke of a candle, while she kept her eyes fixed on the flame itself, the task at hand. So let us linger here, in the hush of a ward at midnight. The air is fresher now, the sheets cleaner, the food warmer. But more than that, the spirits of men rest lighter because someone walked among them with care. The chapter closes gently, like a lamp dimmed at the end of its watch, and we drift onward, ready to follow Florence into the next soft chapter of her steady, endless work. The midnight ward grows quiet again, soldiers drifting into uneasy but gentler sleep, the echo of Florence's lamp fading into the shadows. Yet even as men rested, her mind never truly did. For beyond the wards and the washing, beyond the soups and the statistics, Florence Nightingale began to see a larger picture, one that stretched far beyond Scutari. Picture her seated once more at her desk in the early dawn. Outside, the sea lies still, the horizon faint with the promise of light. Her papers are spread wide before her, numbers, notes, diagrams. She studies them, her brow steady, her hand moving to shape ideas not just for this hospital, but for the very future of nursing and medicine itself. Close your eyes and imagine her thoughts. If cleanliness here could save lives, then why not everywhere? If fresh air and boiled sheets could lower death rates in a war hospital, what could they do in London, in Manchester, in villages across England? Isn't it remarkable how one lamp carried through dark halls could cast its glow across an entire world? Florence began to write not only reports of conditions, but visions of reform. She pressed for public health measures, for clean water in cities, for better sewers, for trained nurses in every hospital. She spoke of hygiene as if it were law, of sanitation as though it were scripture. In her hands, order and soap became sacred tools, her true instruments of healing. Listen closely. The rustle of papers turned one by one, the faint tap of her pen against the desk, the sigh of the sea breeze sneaking in through a cracked window. These are the sounds of vision forming, of ideas taking root in silence. And yet, even as her influence spread, she left her own fame unpolished. Politicians invoked her name, newspapers painted her as a saint, admirers sent her letters of devotion. But Florence kept working, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on drains, kitchens, wards, and statistics. Her fame, like her shadow, followed behind her, but she never turned to tend it. So let us linger here, in this early dawn room where one woman, weary yet unwavering, dreamed of hospitals transformed. The lamp burns low, the sea air drifts in, and her pen scratches gently across paper that would one day guide nations. The chapter closes softly, like the tide pulling back from shore, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next gentle stage of her untiring crusade. The dawn fades into day, Florence's papers stacked neatly in rows, her lamp set aside for a brief rest. Yet even as her words travelled far, her eyes never left the men in her care. For beyond drains and diets, Florence understood something simple but often forgotten, that the small comforts of life mattered as much as medicine. Picture a ward brightened not only by clean sheets and fresh air, but by flowers placed gently on bedside tables. A jar of violets, a sprig of rosemary, a bowl of fruit polished to shine. These were not prescriptions in any medical manual, but Florence insisted on them. To her, beauty was not luxury, it was part of healing. Close your eyes and imagine it. A soldier, weary and fevered, turns his head and sees a small vase by his bed. The flowers are humble, perhaps gathered from nearby fields, yet their scent is light, their colour a burst of life against the grey stone walls. For a moment he is not in a hospital but in memory, of gardens at home, of meadows in spring, of days untouched by war. Isn't it remarkable how something so small could carry such weight? Florence encouraged her nurses to bring tidiness, gentleness, and even a touch of grace into the wards. A folded blanket, a cleanly brushed table, a flower by the window, these became her medicine of spirit. She believed that dignity healed as surely as broth or bandages. Listen closely. The soft clink of a vase set on a table, the faint rustle of petals as air moves past, the low hum of nurses tidying quietly. These are not dramatic sounds, but they are soothing, filling the ward with a calm as steady as any hymn. And yet, as she tended to such small beauties, her own fame grew wild and untended. Poems praised her, songs were written, portraits painted, but she did not pause to arrange her reputation as neatly as she arranged a bedside. She let others tell her story, while she kept her attention on the little details that made men feel alive. So let us linger here, in this ward now softened by touches of life. The flowers glow faintly in lamplight. The air feels gentler, the men rest easier. It is a place not just of survival, but of humanity restored. The chapter closes quietly, like petals folding at the close of day, and we drift onward, following Florence into the next soft chapter of her long, tireless work. The flowers at the bedsides glow faintly in the half-light, their perfume soft, their colours bright against the grey of war. The soldiers rest with calmer spirits, soothed not only by medicine but by gentleness. And as the ward breathes in this new order, Florence Nightingale's lamp carries us to yet another quiet battlefield, diet. For what good are clean sheets and open windows if the food itself weakens the body? In the hospitals of Scutari, rations were often poor. Stale bread, greasy meat, broth thin as water. Men already broken by wounds had little strength left to heal. Florence noticed. She always noticed. Picture the kitchens once again, no longer blackened with grease but now busy with purpose. Nurses stir pots of thick broth, the scent of onions and herbs rising gently into the air. Bread bakes slowly, its crust crackling as it cools. Simple meals, yes, but nourishing ones. Meals that offered not just fuel but comfort. Close your eyes and imagine the taste. A spoonful of warm soup, thicker now, rich with vegetables softened into silk. A slice of bread, fresh and still warm, spread with a little butter. It is not a feast, but in the quiet of the ward it feels like one. Isn't it remarkable how something so simple can feel like restoration itself? Florence believed deeply in diet as medicine. She wrote careful instructions, broths for the weak, fresh milk for fevers, solid bread for strength. She measured, observed, adjusted. In her mind, every bowl carried weight. Every meal could tip the balance between life and death. Listen closely. The scrape of ladles against iron pots, the soft crackle of bread torn by hand, the sigh of soldiers as they take their first bites. These sounds are gentle, but they are healing in their own way. Sounds of nourishment, of bodies slowly finding strength again. And yet, while she transformed the food of hospitals, Florence never feasted on her own fame. Banquets were thrown in her honour. Poems praised her like a queen of mercy. But she turned from them, preferring to count supplies, to test recipes, to focus on the next day's rations. She cleaned the kitchens, but she left her reputation a little untidy. So let us linger here, in the quiet comfort of simple meals. The ward smells faintly of herbs and bread. The men eat slowly, their shoulders easing, their spirits lifting. In this place, soup becomes more than soup. It becomes hope in a bowl. The chapter closes gently, like a spoon laid back into its dish, and we drift onward, following her lamp into the next quiet act of her endless soothing labour. The aroma of broth and fresh bread still lingers in the ward, carrying with it a comfort deeper than flavour. Soldiers, once hollowed by hunger, lean back after their meals, eyes closing with a kind of peace they had not known in weeks. But Florence Nightingale did not measure success only in full bellies or cleaner air. She looked further still, toward the silence of death records and the slow, steady fall of their numbers. Picture her once more at her desk, the lamp burning low, her hands moving across pages of mortality charts. Before her reforms, death was a constant companion in Scutari. 7 of every 10 soldiers admitted did not leave alive. Filth, infection, hunger, these invisible enemies claimed more lives than battle itself. But as her reforms took hold, the numbers began to change. The silence of death grew softer. The clatter of recovery grew louder. Close your eyes and imagine the shift. Where once the air was heavy with the groans of fever, now there are more sighs of relief. Where once the orderlies carried bodies to shallow graves, now more men walk, unsteady but alive, out of the wards. Isn't it remarkable how soap, fresh air and broth could defeat what swords and cannons could not? Florence kept careful count. She noted each life saved, each illness turned aside, each pattern that revealed how cleanliness restored health. For her, numbers were not cold, they were proof of hope. Every downward curve of mortality was a quiet hymn, every reduction a lullaby of survival. Listen closely. The scratch of her pen recording another recovery, the low murmur of nurses reporting fewer fevers, the creak of doors opening as patients are discharged alive. These sounds, gentle as they are, mark a revolution. And yet, while her figures spoke across England, Florence herself avoided the applause. Others lifted her name into speeches, painted her as a saint of mercy. She accepted none of it fully. She left her fame like an untidy bed, useful for others to rest upon, but not something she smoothed for herself. So let us linger here, in this moment when death steps back and life steps forward. The wards are brighter, the men stronger, the air lighter. Change has come not with fanfare, but with buckets and brushes, soups and ledgers, patience and care. The chapter closes softly, like a ledger shut on a kinder number, and we drift onward, ready to follow Florence's lamp into the next quiet chamber of her tireless crusade. The numbers on Florence's charts begin to speak for themselves. The wards are calmer, the death toll lighter, and hope steadier. Yet her lamp does not rest, nor does her eye. For she knew that beyond statistics and scrubbed floors there lay another layer of care, the discipline of routine. Hospitals before her reforms were places of chaos. Meals arrived late or spoiled, medicines were scattered or forgotten, nurses wandered without order. To Florence, disorder itself was a disease. She believed that rhythm, predictable, steady, unwavering, was as vital to healing as any medicine. Picture a ward at sunrise. Instead of confusion, there is rhythm. Beds are made in neat succession. Floors are swept in practiced strokes. Breakfast arrives on time, steam rising softly from bowls. Bandages are changed by steady hands. Each action falls into place like notes of a quiet song. Close your eyes and imagine the comfort of such order. A soldier restless and weak does not wonder when he will eat, when his wound will be cleaned, when his bed will be changed. He knows. The rhythm carries him, calming his mind even as his body struggles. Isn't it remarkable how routine itself can heal, turning chaos into calm, fear into trust? Florence set these routines with the precision of a clockmaker. She built schedules, delegated tasks, ensured that each nurse knew her duty. She believed that predictability was kindness, that the sick should not be burdened with uncertainty. And under her guidance, hospitals began to breathe with rhythm, each day moving like a steady tide. Listen closely. The quiet swish of a broom against stone, the clink of trays set neatly in place, the soft murmur of nurses exchanging duties. These are not loud sounds, but they're soothing, like a lullaby of order humming through the halls. And yet while she imposed routine on others, her own image remained unscheduled, untended. Fame rose and fell around her like unpredictable waves, but she paid them little mind. She cared only that the work was done, that the rhythm held. So let us linger here, in this ward where time itself feels gentler. The beds are aligned, the meals warm, the nurses steady, the patients calmer. The lamp glows in Florence's hand, steady as always, her figure moving quietly through the ordered rows. The chapter closes softly, like a clock striking the hour in a hushed room, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next gentle act of her long, tireless work. The steady rhythm of routine now hums quietly through the wards, like a lullaby woven from order itself. Meals arrive on time, beds are neat, floors are swept. The soldiers rest more peacefully, not only because their wounds are tended, but because their days have found a gentle shape. And as this calm takes root, Florence Nightingale's lamp leads us to yet another corner of her quiet revolution. Record-keeping beyond numbers, the written stories of care. Florence understood that memory fades, but records endure. And so, alongside her statistics, she urged nurses to keep notes of treatments given, of symptoms observed, of small changes in patients day by day. In a time when medicine often relied more on guesswork than evidence, these notes became maps, guiding better care. Picture her at a bedside with a small notebook in hand. She bends low, listening to a soldier describe his pain. She writes with quick, precise strokes. Temperature, pulse, appetite, restlessness. The man may not see the value of these scratches on paper, but Florence knows. Each line is a thread, weaving patterns that will help untangle illness itself. Close your eyes and imagine the sound. The scratch of pen on paper, the soft clearing of a throat before a question, the rustle of pages turned carefully. These are not dramatic sounds, but they carry weight. The sound of medicine becoming more thoughtful, more deliberate, more scientific. Isn't it remarkable how something as quiet as a nurse's notebook could change the course of healing? Florence believed that hospitals should not only care for the sick, but also teach the living how to care better. Notes became lessons, patterns became knowledge, and over time entire practices shifted from instinct to evidence. And yet, once more, her own reputation she left unrecorded by her own hand. Others wrote books about her, songs in her honour, poems in her praise. She filled pages with patients' fevers, with lists of wounds, with reports on drains and diets, but never with careful tending of her own fame. Listen closely. The turn of a page, the murmur of a soldier answering her calm questions, the hush of the ward as men drift back into sleep. These are the gentle sounds of care written into history, not loudly but steadily, like a pen moving without pause. So let us linger here, in this ward where notebooks fill quietly with details that will save lives tomorrow. The lamp glows low, Florence writes steadily, and the men rest in cleaner, calmer air. The chapter closes softly, like a journal shut at the end of the day, and we drift onward, following her lamp into the next quiet act of her tireless care. The notebooks close softly, stacked neatly on Florence's desk, each one filled with careful lines of ink, small observations that together form a greater truth. The wards now hum with quiet order, the air fresher, the meal steadier. Yet Florence's lamp continues to move, guiding us toward another layer of her work, communication with the world beyond Scutari. Florence understood that the changes within these walls could not stay hidden. If hospitals in war could be reformed, so too could hospitals at home. And so she wrote letters, long and precise, addressed to government officials, to fellow reformers, to anyone who might listen. Her words carried not only reports but urgency, a plea for reform that stretched far beyond the soldiers before her. Picture her seated at her desk once more, the lamp steady beside her. Her hand moves swiftly, filling page after page with descriptions of filth turned clean, of drains cleared, of mortality rates falling. She tells not only what has been done, but what still must be done. Close your eyes and imagine the sound, the steady scratch of quill on paper, the sigh as she pauses to dip it into ink, the faint rustle of papers spread across her desk. Around her, the hospital sleeps, but her words are already on their way to London, where they'll rattle desks far grander than hers. Isn't it remarkable how such quiet letters could echo louder than speeches in Parliament? Florence knew the power of detail. She did not write in grand flourishes, but in simple truth. Numbers, conditions, results. Her words could not be ignored, for they were tethered to evidence. And slowly her reforms began to stretch outward, carried on the ink of her letters. Listen closely. The creak of the chair as she shifts, the soft thump of sealed envelopes stacked in a pile, the distant call of a guard outside the hospital gates. These are the sounds of her influence growing, not loudly but with persistence, one letter at a time. And yet, while her reports shaped policy and practice across a nation, she still left her own fame unshaped. Others told her story in songs, paintings, and public speeches. She kept to her desk, her lamp, her endless pages. She cleaned the hospitals, the drains, the records, but her own legacy she left as untidy as ever, content to let others polish it for her. So let us linger here, in this room where ink still gleams wet on fresh pages. The lamp glows low, the papers lie stacked, and Florence sits steady, her eyes set not on praise but on the next reform to be written. The chapter closes softly, like a letter sealed with wax in the hush of night, and we drift onward, following her lamp into the next quiet act of her steady, endless labour. The sealed letters rest in tidy stacks, ready to travel far from Scutari, carrying Florence's quiet authority into the chambers of power. But within the hospital her work did not pause, for beyond drains and diets, beyond notes and numbers, she turned her lamp towards something subtler, the spirit of the men themselves. War breaks more than bodies. It wears down courage, frays hope, and leaves men hollow even when wounds begin to heal. Florence understood this. She knew that recovery demanded more than medicine, that a man's spirit needed tending just as much as his fevered brow. Picture her moving softly between cots in the evening, the lamp glowing faintly against the stone walls. She pauses by a bed where a soldier stares into nothing, his hands trembling. She asks him of home, of his family, of small memories that make his eyes soften for a moment. To another, she offers not words but presence, simply standing there long enough for him to feel less alone. Close your eyes and imagine it. The touch of a blanket pulled higher, the murmur of a kind voice, the faint glimmer of light across a darkened face. These are not medicines in bottles, but they soothe like balm. Isn't it remarkable how kindness itself can heal wounds unseen? Florence encouraged her nurses to do the same, to move gently, to listen, to bring small touches of humanity into places where despair had settled. A flower in a jar, a word of comfort, a steady hand. These became her quiet prescriptions. Listen closely. The faint creak of floorboards as she steps softly, the rustle of sheets as she adjusts them, the low murmur of a soldier whispering thanks. These sounds are as much a part of healing as the clink of spoons in broth or the scratch of pens on paper. And yet, while the soldiers spoke of her as their angel, Florence herself brushed the title aside. Fame wrapped her like a cloak she never asked to wear. She cleaned spirits with kindness, but she left her own reputation uncombed, allowing others to shape it as they wished. So let us linger here, in this ward softened by quiet gestures. The air carries not only cleanliness, but warmth. The men rest easier, their breath slower, their faces calmer. And in the hush, Florence's lamp glows steady, a symbol not of glory, but of care. The chapter closes gently, like a hand resting softly on a shoulder, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next calm corner of her work. The ward rests in a softer silence now, steadied not only by clean sheets and warm meals, but by the presence of Florence's quiet care. Her lamp moves like a star across the room, pausing here, lingering there, each stop a thread of comfort in the vast fabric of suffering. Yet Florence's work was never bound to one ward or even to one hospital. Her mind wandered farther, toward the future of nursing itself, for she knew that war would end, but illness would not. The lessons learned in Scutari, if left behind, would vanish like steam from a kettle. So she began to dream of something larger, a school for nurses, a place where the order she had built could be taught, preserved, and multiplied. Picture her years later, standing in the halls of St. Thomas's Hospital in London. The war is behind her, but the lamp still burns in her hand, at least in memory. She oversees rows of young women in plain uniforms, their hair tied neatly, their faces set with determination. They are not merely attendants, they are students, learning the discipline of cleanliness, the rhythm of care, the dignity of service. Close your eyes and imagine the sound, the shuffle of shoes in training halls, the soft murmur of Florence's voice as she instructs, the clink of basins filled and emptied in practice. Each sound is the beginning of something lasting, a profession where once there was only chaos. Isn't it remarkable how one woman's stubbornness with soap and schedules became the seed of modern nursing? Florence believed that nursing was not charity but skill, that it deserved respect, training, and recognition. And through her school, thousands of women carried her lessons into hospitals across the world. Her lamp, once a single glow in Scutari's darkness, became 1,000 lamps in countless wards. Listen closely. The steady hum of students repeating instructions, the scratch of pens as they copy lessons, the low voices of nurses preparing for their first patients. These sounds are the lullabies of a profession being born. And yet, even as she founded schools and wrote textbooks, Florence still did not polish her own story. Others painted her as a saint, a heroine, a legend. She left their portraits untouched, preferring to tend her curriculum, her lectures, her endless lists. She cleaned hospitals and trained generations, but her own fame she allowed to remain scattered, untidy, in the hands of others. So let us linger here, in the halls of her school where knowledge takes root. The young nurses practice their tasks, their hands steady, their faces calm. The lamp of Florence Nightingale glows not in one woman's hand now, but in all of theirs, carried forward into future nights. The chapter closes gently, like a door eased shut on a classroom after lessons are done. And we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next quiet stretch of her long enduring influence. The halls of St. Thomas's Hospital echo softly with the shuffle of shoes and the murmur of young nurses in training. Florence Nightingale's lessons spread like ripples, each one steady, each one shaping the future of care. But even as her school flourished, Florence herself stepped away from the public eye. For her body grew weary, though her mind remained tireless. Picture her in her later years, confined to her London home. The war is long past, her school well established, her reforms already shaping hospitals across Britain. And yet the lamp still burns, this time not in her hand as she walks corridors, but in her mind as she writes, dictates, and advises. Close your eyes and imagine her room. The curtains are drawn against the bustle of the city, the furniture plain but orderly. On a small table lies a stack of papers, and beside it a bell to summon assistance. Florence rests in her chair, her body frail, her voice softer now, but her will as firm as ever. Isn't it remarkable how influence can outlast strength? How a tired body can still command a world with words? She continued to write reports, advise governments, and press for reforms. Hospitals improved their sanitation systems, cities built cleaner sewers, and nurses trained in her methods spread across the globe. Even from her quiet room, Florence's reach grew wider than ever before. Listen closely. The faint scratch of pens as assistants take down her words, the rustle of papers exchanged, the steady tick of a clock marking each slow minute. These sounds, simple as they are, carried her thoughts into places she could no longer walk herself. And yet, while her influence deepened, Florence remained uninterested in arranging her own fame. Honours were offered, medals bestowed, statues erected. She accepted some politely, refused others quietly, and returned always to her papers, her ideas, her reforms. She'd scrubbed hospitals clean, but she let her legend gather dust in corners she never bothered to sweep. So let us linger here, in the hush of her London home. Outside, the city grows noisier, faster, more modern. Inside, Florence Nightingale works still, her presence quiet but unshakable, her lamp now glowing not in corridors but in the minds of those she trained and inspired. The chapter closes softly, like a curtain drawn against evening light, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next calm stretch of her long, enduring story. The quiet of Florence's London room grows familiar now, the tick of the clock, the faint shuffle of papers, the hushed voices of assistants writing her words. Outside, the world quickens into the late 19th century, but inside her lamp still glows in thought, guiding reforms that stretch far beyond her chair. For though her body weakened, Florence's mind wandered far. She advised on hospitals in India, on army health across the empire, on sanitation in growing cities. From a single lamp in Scutari, her influence spread outward, like circles rippling across still water. Picture her dictating slowly, her voice softer now but clear. Clean water, she insists. Fresh air, proper drainage, order. The words are simple, almost plain, yet they carry the weight of survival itself. Clerks jot them down, governments act on them, and lives are changed in places Florence will never see. Close your eyes and imagine the reach. A nurse in a faraway colony adjusts a patient's sheets, remembering her training. An engineer oversees the digging of new sewers, repeating her principles. A doctor studies her charts, finds guidance in her numbers. Isn't it remarkable how the quiet persistence of one woman could ripple through an entire world? Listen closely. The distant sound of carriage wheels on London streets, the soft murmur of voices reading her words aloud, the creak of floorboards as nurses in training walk the halls of her school. These sounds, faint and ordinary, are echoes of her lamp carried forward. And yet, while her influence stretched across continents, Florence herself shrank from the spotlight. She refused grand appearances, avoided ceremonies, and let others polish her story. Statues were carved, medals offered, praises sung, but she did not tend them. She left her own fame uncleaned, preferring to keep her mind on the next reform, the next letter, the next chart. So let us linger here, in this quiet London room that nonetheless touches the world. The lamp glows faintly on the desk, papers stack high, and Florence Nightingale, weary yet resolute, continues her work in whispers. The chapter closes gently, like ripples settling back into still water, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next soft chapter of her story. The quiet of Florence's London home remains steady, her lamp glowing low, her papers spreading like ripples of thought across the table. But outside her walls, the world continues to shape her into legend. Newspapers print her name with reverence. Poets call her an angel. Painters capture her with soft halos of light. And yet Florence herself sits quietly, listening only to the scratch of pens and the tick of clocks. Picture the grand halls of London where speeches are given in her honour. Men in polished boots speak of her as if she were a saint, their words rising with pride. Crowds applaud, statues are unveiled, medals are struck. But Florence is not there. She stays in her room, her body frail, her mind too busy with charts and reports to stand among such noise. Close your eyes and imagine the contrast. Outside, the world polishes her image until it gleams. Inside, her hair is simple, her clothes plain, her desk cluttered with ink and notes. She has cleaned countless wards, yet she lets the dust of fame settle quietly on her shoulders. Isn't it remarkable how a woman so disciplined in order left her own reputation in such disorder? Still, the soldiers remembered her not for speeches, but for the lamp that glowed as she walked their bedsides. They recalled the way her shadow stretched across walls, the way her presence brought calm to fevered nights. For them, she was not a saint of marble, but a nurse of flesh and breath, tired, firm and kind. Listen closely. The distant murmur of crowds praising her name, the solemn strike of church bells in her honour, the softer sound of her pen still scratching, still working. Two worlds overlap, the myth outside, the woman within, and yet Florence did not try to join the two. She allowed her fame to wander, to be shaped by others, while she kept her focus on drains, kitchens and health. She'd cleaned nearly everything else, but her own story she left untidy. So let us linger here in this strange balance. The world outside shouts her legend. The room inside hums with quiet work. The lamp burns low, steady as ever, while history begins to weave her image into something larger than life. The chapter closes softly, like applause fading beyond closed doors, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the final chapter of her long, luminous tale. The world outside grows quieter now, the applause fading, the statues already gathering the dust of years. Inside her London home, Florence Nightingale remains in her chair, her lamp glowing faintly as always. The woman who cleaned kitchens, laundries, drains and wards sits surrounded by papers and silence. And though her fame swirls like a storm beyond her door, within these walls it feels like a calm evening tide. Picture her in her final years, frail in body yet sharp in mind. Visitors come, some eager to meet the legend, others hoping for advice. She greets them softly, sometimes briefly, often preferring to remain in the company of her thoughts. For Florence knew that her greatest work had already been set in motion. The nurses she trained, the systems she reformed, the lessons she wrote, they would carry her lamp forward long after she set it down. Close your eyes and imagine the glow of her lamp one last time. Not bright, not grand, but steady. A flame that guided soldiers through pain, guided nurses into their profession, guided governments toward cleaner cities. Isn't it remarkable how a light so small became a beacon for the world? Listen closely. The tick of a clock marking slow hours, the rustle of papers being gathered for the last time, the hush of a city outside moving into the 20th century. These sounds, gentle and unassuming, mark the close of her life's long rhythm. When Florence passed in 1910, she left behind more than a name. She left cleaner hospitals, trained nurses, better drains, steadier routines, and a vision of care rooted in dignity. She'd cleaned nearly everything in her reach, except her own fame, which she left for others to polish, reshape, and retell. And perhaps that was fitting, for she was never working for her story, but for the lives her hands could touch. So let us linger here, just a moment longer, in the glow of her lamp. Imagine its light softening as if it were a candle nearing its end, not extinguished, but passed on, into the hands of every nurse who followed, into every hospital ward that breathed cleaner air because of her. The chapter closes quietly, like a lamp gently dimmed at the end of a long night, and with it, we close her story, steady, luminous, and forever unfinished, carried forward in silence and care. The lamp of Florence Nightingale glows still in memory, though the wards of Scutari have long since emptied, their echoes fading into history. Tonight we follow her into a quieter, subtler battlefield, hospital design itself. For Florence knew that health was not just about tending wounds or boiling sheets. It was also about the very walls, the very air, the very way buildings were shaped. Picture a large sheet of paper stretched across a desk. On it, careful lines are drawn, wards long and straight, windows tall and wide, corridors spacious enough for air to move. This was no idle sketch. These were her blueprints, her vision of what a hospital should be, not a place of gloom and suffocation, but of order, light, and breath. Close your eyes and imagine walking into one of her envisioned wards. The air feels lighter, not heavy with sickness, but stirred gently by drafts from high windows. Sunlight pours across the floor, turning stone into something almost warm. Beds are arranged in tidy rows, each with enough space for air to circulate, each within reach of a nurse's eye. Isn't it remarkable how even the placement of a window could tip the balance between despair and healing? Florence believed in what she called the pavilion principle. Wards should be long and narrow, with windows on both sides, so that light and air could pass through freely. No patient should be hidden in shadow, no corner left to stale air. In her mind, architecture itself could be medicine, and hospitals should be designed to heal, not merely to contain. Listen closely. The scratch of architects' pens as they adjust their drafts, the murmur of debates over materials and dimensions, the low hum of clerks copying her instructions. These are not dramatic sounds, but they are steady, weaving her influence into brick and mortar. And indeed, her designs reached far. Hospitals across Britain and beyond began to adopt her principles. Corridors widened, windows enlarged, ventilation improved. The lessons of Scutari's filth were built into new foundations, so that future wards would never again sink into the same despair. Yet, as always, Florence herself did not step forward to polish her role. Others gave her credit, others lifted her name, but she remained focused on the work. She'd cleaned kitchens, laundries, drains, and diets, and now she was quietly cleaning the very design of hospitals themselves. But her own fame she left untended, allowing it to be shaped, messy and uneven, by the hands of others. So let us linger here, in one of her imagined wards. The light slants through windows, fresh air drifts in, and patients rest in spaces shaped with care. The building itself feels like a nurse, quiet, steady, comforting. The chapter closes gently, like a set of blueprints rolled and tied with ribbon. And we drift onward, following her lamp into the next quiet act of her story. The blueprints of hospitals roll neatly into history, their lines carrying Florence Nightingale's quiet influence into bricks and stone. Yet she knew that not all healing would happen within those walls, for hospitals, no matter how well designed, could not reach every home, every family, every bedside, and so she took up another tool, her pen once more, to write not just for governments, but for ordinary people. Picture a slim book, plain in cover, its title simple, Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not. Published in 1859, it was not filled with grand theories or complicated cures. Instead, it spoke in Florence's firm, practical voice about the essentials: fresh air, clean water, light, warmth, diet, and quiet. These were not luxuries. These were the foundations of health. Close your eyes and imagine a household in Victorian England. A mother reads the book by lamplight, her children asleep nearby. She learns that an open window, though chilly, might save her child from fever. A young nurse, new to her duties, copies passages into her notebook, determined to carry them into the wards. Even a servant girl, handed a copy by her employer, begins to understand how tidiness and care can protect a family. Isn't it remarkable how the plainest words, written without flourish, could ripple into so many lives? Florence wrote as though she was speaking directly to the reader. She did not waste time with praise or poetry. She gave instructions, clear and firm. Do not shut up sick rooms against air. Do not serve spoiled food. Do not ignore the importance of cleanliness. It was, in its way, a lullaby of practicality, words steady enough to guide even the most uncertain caretaker. Listen closely. The crackle of pages turned slowly, the scratch of pens copying passages, the faint hum of someone reading aloud by firelight. These are the sounds of her book travelling quietly into homes and hospitals alike. Notes on Nursing became more than a book. It became a cornerstone of a profession. Nurses in training used it. Families in crisis relied on it. Doctors themselves respected it. Its lessons were not flashy, but they endured, because they were true, tested by the quiet trials of sick rooms across the world. And yet, while the book spread her name into homes far beyond her reach, Florence herself remained indifferent to the glory. She did not polish her image as author, did not bask in literary fame. She'd written not for her story, but for the health of others. Her own reputation, as ever, she left untidy, scattered like loose papers on her desk. So let us linger here, in a home warmed by firelight, where her book rests open on a table. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, the words guide gentle hands, keeping illness at bay. Her voice drifts softly from the page, as steady and firm as her lamp once was in Scutari's wards. The chapter closes quietly, like a book shut with care after a long evening of reading, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the next gentle stage of her story. The pages of Notes on Nursing rest close now, its wisdom carried into homes and wards far beyond Florence's reach. Yet within her own quiet hours, another kind of record remained, the memories she carried of the soldiers of Scutari. For no matter how many reforms she designed, how many schools she built, the faces of those men lingered like shadows in lamplight. Picture her in her London home years after the war. The city hums outside, but her room is still. On her desk lie charts and reports, yet her eyes drift to a faraway place. The stone corridors of Scutari, the endless rows of cots, the air once thick with fever and despair. Close your eyes and imagine the weight of those memories. She recalls the soldier who pressed a letter into her hand, begging it be sent home. Another, whose fever broke just as dawnlight touched his face. Another still, whose last word was not of war, but of his mother. Each memory etched itself deeper than ink, shaping her resolve to fight filth, to demand change, to never allow such suffering to be dismissed. Isn't it remarkable how memory, invisible and silent, can shape reforms more powerfully than statistics? Florence seldom spoke publicly of these recollections. She buried them beneath data, reports, and policies. Yet, in the quiet of night, she must have heard them. The coughs, the groans, the whispered thanks. Perhaps it was these sounds, more than numbers on a page, that drove her to labour so tirelessly in later years. Listen closely. The echo of boots in stone corridors, the soft scrape of cots being shifted, the faint murmur of men calling out in half-sleep. These sounds, long gone from the world, lived on in her mind, steady as the tick of a clock. And yet, while she honoured those memories through reform, she left her own legend untended. She did not write a grand memoir, did not polish her role as heroine. Others told the story of the lady with the lamp, while she herself remained in shadow, her own memories too raw, too personal, too sacred to display. So let us linger here, in her London room where silence carries echoes of Scutari. The lamp burns low, her eyes thoughtful, her mind returning not to medals or speeches, but to the soldiers whose faces shaped her resolve. The chapter closes softly, like the fading of voices in a dream, and we drift onward, ready to follow her into the final, gentlest light of her story. The memories of Scutari drift like shadows in Florence Nightingale's quiet room. Yet beyond them, another image began to glow brighter than all the rest. The lamp itself. Small, modest, carried through darkened wards not as a symbol, but as a simple tool. And yet, it became the image by which the world remembered her. Picture the lamp in her hand, its flame steady against the chill of stone corridors. Soldiers half asleep would lift their eyes and see the glow pass by, the light falling across her face just for a moment, before she moved onward. To them, it was not a lantern of glory, but of comfort, proof that someone was watching, someone cared. Close your eyes and imagine its glow, not blazing, not blinding, but soft, a circle of light that touched only what was near, a bed, a wounded face, a folded blanket, and yet, in memory, that circle grew until it illuminated an entire profession. Isn't it remarkable how something so plain, so ordinary, could become a beacon for generations? The lamp became the emblem of nursing itself. Ceremonies were created where new nurses carried lamps in their hands, symbols of vigilance and care. Schools adopted it as their crest. Poems praised its glow. Statues carved it into stone. What had been merely a vessel for oil and flame became something far greater, the eternal light of compassion. Listen closely. The faint hiss of a wick catching oil, the soft crackle as flame steadies, the slow footsteps of a nurse carrying light through silence. These are the lullabies of vigilance, the music of care that does not rest, even in the darkest hours. And yet, Florence herself never clung to the symbol. She did not polish the lamp for legend, did not carry it for applause. She held it because the corridors were dark and the men needed tending. The world made it eternal. She meant only to make her way from bed to bed. So let us linger here, in the glow of that modest light. Imagine it resting now, not in her hand, but in the hands of every nurse who followed, every caretaker who keeps watch through the night. Its flame is steady still, burning in rooms across the world, quiet, calm, unwavering. The chapter closes softly, like a flame lowered but never extinguished. And with it, Florence Nightingale's story eases into its lasting glow. Not loud, not grand, but eternal. And so, friends, we have drifted through the long, gentle story of Florence Nightingale, the lady with the lamp, who cleaned everything except her own fame. May her patience, her steadiness, and her quiet courage guide you now into peaceful dreams. If you found calm in this journey, if somewhere along the way your eyes grew heavy, you may let me know with a like, a subscribe, or even a quiet comment below, but only if it feels right, only if it flows as softly as sleep itself. For now, may the memory of lamplight and quiet footsteps carry you deeper into rest. Sweet dreams, and good night, whispered softly until the story fades into silence.